for the committee to conduct investigations. 6. The committee voted to approve a motion directing the chairman to authorize and issue a subpoena to you for a deposition. On January 23, 2026, Chairman Comer issued a subpoena for Mr. Kahn to appear today for a deposition in furtherance of the committee's investigation into the actions and investigations of Mr. Jeffrey Epstein and Ms. Ghislaine Maxwell. I will enter the subpoena and corresponding cover letter as Exhibit 1. The committee noticed the deposition from Mr. Kahn on March 4, 2026. I will enter the notice for this deposition as Exhibit 2. Can the witness please state his name and spell his last name for the record?
Richard Kahn, K-A-H-N.
Thank you. My name is Billy Grant, and I am the Deputy Chief Counsel for Investigations for Chairman James Comer. Under the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform's rules, you are allowed to have counsel present to advise you during this deposition. Do you have counsel representing you in a personal capacity present with you today?
Yes.
Will counsel please identify themselves for the record?
Sure. Daniel Razumna, R-U-Z-U-M-N-A, on behalf of Richard Kahn.
Joshua Berman, B-E-R-M-A-N, on behalf of Mr. Kahn.
For the record, starting with the majority staff, can the additional staff members please introduce themselves with their name, title, and affiliation?
Jack Emmer, Chief Counsel for Investigations, for Chairman Comer.
Peter Spector, Deputy Director of Oversight for Chairman Comer.
Daniel Ashworth, General Counsel for Chairman Comer.
Ryan Giacchetti, Chief Counsel for Chairman Comer.
Will Harness, Professional Staff Member for Chairman Comer.
Hannah Cathy, Professional Staff Member for Chairman Comer.
Emily Feierabend, Counsel for Chairman Comer.
Ellison Tolan, Counsel for Chairman Comer.
Brittany Bernion, Senior Counsel for Chairman Comer.
Jack Furla, Counsel for Chairman Comer.
Ashley Benyard, Deputy Staff Director, Chairman Comer.
Justin Collins, Communications Director.
And would the members of Congress please introduce themselves?
James Comer from Kentucky.
James Walkinshaw, Virginia.
Thank you all. Mr. Kahn, before we begin, I would like to go over the ground rules for this deposition. The questioning will proceed in rounds. The majority will ask questions for an hour, and then the minority will have an opportunity to ask questions for an hour if they choose. To the extent members have questions for the witness, they will be propounded during their side's respective rounds. The clock will stop if you need to confer with counsel, your counsel is speaking, and when members or staff are speaking during the opposing side's round of questions. We will alternate back and forth until there are no more questions. Do you understand?
Yes.
There is a court reporter taking down everything I say and everything you say to make a written record of the deposition. For the record to be clear, please wait until the staffer questioning you finishes each question before you begin your answer, and the staffer will wait until you finish your response before proceeding to the next question. Further, to ensure the court reporter can properly record this deposition, please speak clearly, concisely, and slowly. Also, the court reporter cannot record nonverbal answers, such as nodding or shaking your head. So it is important that you answer each question with an audible verbal answer. Do you understand?
Yes.
Exhibits may be entered into the record. Majority exhibits will be identified numerically. Minority exhibits will be identified alphabetically. Do you understand?
Yes.
We want you to answer our questions in the most complete and truthful manner possible, so we will take our time. If you have any questions or do not fully understand the question, please let us know. We will attempt to clarify, add context to, or rephrase our questions. If we ask about specific conversations or events in the past and you are unable to recall the exact words or details, you should testify to the substance of those conversations or events, to the best of your recollection. If you recall only a part of a conversation or event, you should give us your best recollection of those events or parts of conversations that you do recall. Do you understand?
Yes.
You are required by law to answer questions from Congress truthfully. This also applies to questions posed by congressional staff in this deposition. Do you understand?
Yes.
If at any time you knowingly make false statements, you could be subject to criminal prosecution, including but not limited to perjury. Do you understand?
Yes.
This includes both knowingly providing false testimony, but also stating that you do not recall or remember something when in fact you do. Do you understand?
Yes.
Furthermore, you cannot tell half-truths or exclude information necessary to make statements accurate. You are required to provide all information that would make your response truthful. A deliberate failure to disclose information can constitute a false statement. Do you understand?
Yes.
Is there any reason you are unable to provide truthful testimony in today's deposition?
No.
Please note that if you wish to assert a privilege over any statement today, that assertion must comply with the rules of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. Pursuant to that, Committee Rule 16C1 states, for the chair to consider assertions of privilege over testimony or statements, witnesses or entities must clearly state the specific privilege being asserted and the reason for the assertion on or before the scheduled date of testimony or appearance. For the purposes of the deposition, objections must be stated concisely and in a non-argumentative and non-suggestive manner. If the witness refuses to answer a question to preserve a privilege, the committee may seek a ruling from the chair. If the chair overrules any such objection, the witness shall be ordered to answer. If the witness continues to refuse to answer a question, despite being ordered to do so, the witness may be subject to sanction. Do you understand?
Yes.
Ordinarily, we take a 5-minute break at the end of each hour of questioning. But if you need a longer break or a break before that, please let us know and we'll be happy to accommodate. However, to the extent that there is a pending question, we would ask that you finish answering the question before we take the break. Do you understand?
Yes.
Finally, I will note for everyone here today that the content of what we discuss in the deposition today is confidential under the House Deposition Regulation. Under the rules, the chairman and ranking minority member shall consult before any release of testimony or transcripts, including portions thereof. This means it is a violation of House and committee rules to disclose content of the deposition prior to its official release. For this reason, the marked exhibits that we will use today will remain with the court reporter so that they can go into the official transcript, and any copies of those exhibits will be kept at the table or returned to us when we wrap up. Can the reporter please swear in the witness?
Yes, sir. Sir, will you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly declare and affirm, under the penalty of perjury, that the testimony you will give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have any other questions before we begin?
No.
Mr. Kahn would like to make a statement before we begin. It's an opening statement. I have to give a copy to the court reporter as well.
We'll mark this statement as Exhibit 3.
I would like to thank the committee for the opportunity to testify and thereby try to set the record straight on a number of important points. Because I expect the committee has many questions, I will keep this statement brief. First, in the years that I provided outside accounting and bookkeeping services for Jeffrey Epstein, I was not aware of the terrible and unforgivable things that he did to women and girls. My relationship with Epstein was strictly on a professional level. We did not interact socially, and I never attended any of his parties or his social functions. While Epstein was alive, I never observed any sexual abuse or trafficking of women and never received a complaint, either by one of Epstein's victims or anyone else, of such abuse or trafficking. Epstein told me that his 2006 arrest was a mistake, that he did not know the woman was underage, and that nothing like that would happen again. I believed him at the time and never saw what appeared to be a minor in his presence. Had I learned of any of his horrific behavior, I would have quit work immediately. Second, in the work that I performed on behalf of Epstein or his companies, I did not see anything that suggested to me that Epstein was abusing or trafficking women or otherwise acting unlawfully. I worked with other accountants and bookkeepers to track spending on Epstein's properties and other assets, and in the few years before Epstein's death, I also tracked his investments. With homes in the Virgin Islands, New York, Palm Beach, Paris, and New Mexico, and with several planes and a helicopter, Epstein had substantial yearly expenditures and a large staff. We tracked the expenditures as meticulously as possible, including gifts by Epstein to women and men. The gifts represent a very small fraction of Epstein's spending. I did not see them as red flags for abuse or trafficking. Third, some media sources have reported that Epstein used corporate structures and cash to conceal his identity and hide his sexual abuse and trafficking. Based on my experience and conversations with financial officers for family offices, the use of limited liability companies by wealthy individuals to hold assets such as real estate or major assets like airplanes and helicopters is completely standard practice. I had no role in setting up any of Epstein's companies, but did not view them as improper or suspicious. Like all expenditures, we tried to closely track the use of cash at Epstein's properties, and where backup was missing, we treated cash and other expenditures as gifts by Epstein and reported them when appropriate on Epstein's gift tax returns. Finally, I agreed to serve as co-executor of Epstein's estate. By the time of Epstein's death, I had learned of the harm that he had caused to so many women and thought that my knowledge of Epstein's holdings would make me better prepared to alleviate some of their suffering. One of the first things my co-executor and I did was set up the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund, which resolved claims by over 130 women in a confidential manner, without limits as to their recovery and without any decision-making by the estate. We also settled nearly 60 claims by Epstein's victims. I have done my best to balance my obligations as a fiduciary of the estate with the interest in providing legitimate compensation to Epstein's victims. For this work, I have been the subject of attacks by plaintiffs' lawyers and have had my reputation dragged through the mud. It has taken a tremendous toll on me and my family, but I continue to serve as co-executor because I believe it is the right thing to do. I was not aware of the nature or extent of Epstein's abuse of so many women until after Epstein's death. However, it pains me to think, and I deeply regret, that I may have unknowingly assisted Epstein in any way. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we begin, will the additional members of Congress who joined us please identify themselves for the record?
Representative Suhas Sivaradian for James.
Rothschild for California 17.
And for the additional person that just walked in, will you please identify yourself for the record? Thank you. The clock reads 10:11 a.m. and the majority's time will begin now. Mr. Kahn, thank you for appearing here today. I'm going to get started with just some brief background information on you. Can you tell us where you went to college?
I went to Syracuse University,
And what degree did you graduate with?
an accounting degree.
Did you, after graduating from Syracuse, did you obtain any other professional degrees or licensures or anything like that?
I later obtained a master's degree in taxation from Pace University.
And what year was that?
I don't recall the exact year, maybe late 90s, 99.
And after these degrees, can we briefly go through your professional career prior to you joining, prior to you starting employment with Mr. Epstein?
Yes,
Can you just walk through that for us, please?
certainly. After college, I worked for 3 public accounting firms. The first firm was Coopers & Lybrand, which at the time I believe was a Big 4 accounting firm. The next firm I worked for was Richard Eisner & Company, a mid-sized firm. And then I worked for a small firm called KNHN.
And when did you join, or when did you first become employed with Mr. Epstein?
I interviewed for a job with Epstein in October of 2005.
And when did you first meet Mr. Epstein?
I met him in October of 2005. I don't recall the date, and I believe I started employment about 2 weeks later.
And when you first met him, can you explain where that was and what you were doing?
Yes, I was at the time, I had reached out to recruiting firms looking for an accounting or a CFO job. And I believe I was looking at the Times and came across a recruiter who advertised for a job as a accountant bookkeeper. And I did not know when he said to me that I was going to have an interview who it was. And I found out about 30 minutes before the interview that I was going to be interviewing with Jeffrey Epstein. And my first interview with Epstein was at his townhouse. I don't recall the date or the time, but it's sometime in October 2005.
And what did you discuss during that interview?
I don't recall the exact conversation. I believe the interview lasted about 10 minutes with Epstein asking me questions about my previous employment.
Did you know anything about Mr. Epstein prior to that interview with him?
I believe in the 30 minutes before the interview, I saw that there was one article about him. I think it was, maybe it was the International Man of Mystery article.
Was anyone else present during your interview with Mr. Epstein?
Not that I recall.
Anyone greet you at the door when you walked in for your interview with Mr. Epstein?
It certainly wasn't him, so someone must have, but I don't recall who that was.
What were your first impressions of Mr. Epstein?
It was a very quick interview. So I didn't really have much impressions. It was, I was used to, longer interviews. So it was very brief, and I had a tough time knowing after the interview if it was, someone that was interested in hiring me or not. So it was unknown of what was going to take place going forward.
And who informed you that you were officially hired for the job?
I believe the recruiter reached out to me.
What did you understand Mr. Epstein's job to be at the time that you started working with him?
I understood that he was providing financial, tax, and estate planning to clients.
Did you know anything about Mr. Epstein's background when you first started working with him, as in, his past of where he had previously worked, where he went to school, things like that?
I believe I knew that, and I don't know, maybe it was from the coworkers that told me that he worked at Bear Stearns previously. And I also understand that he did not finish his college education.
And at the time of you first beginning employment with Mr. Epstein, did you already understand him, Mr. Epstein, to be a wealthy individual?
I knew he was a wealthy individual from at least some of the assets he had, homes, planes. But at the time I began working for Epstein, I was pretty much focused on bookkeeping and dealing with his insurance and investments outside of stocks and bonds. So at that point in time, I was not preparing asset summaries for him and was unaware of his net worth or the value of his brokerage accounts.
And you mentioned handling his investments outside of stocks and bonds. What sort of investments would those be?
If Epstein wanted to invest in a newspaper or a magazine, if he wanted to invest in a private company, I would usually be the point person to maybe look at the financial statements before he made the investment or while he was holding the investment to monitor the investment on his behalf.
And did Mr. Epstein ever invest in any newspapers or publications?
I believe that Epstein invested with Mort Zuckerman in Radar magazine.
Any other publications?
There was another investment, which I don't recall if it was Epstein or one of his clients, but a company by the name of Seed Media Group.
And what did Seed Media Group do, to your understanding?
I believe it originally was doing scientific analytics and then maybe pivoted into a magazine. I don't recall the specifics, but that is my general understanding.
During your time working with Mr. Epstein, did you develop a personal relationship with him outside of work?
Mr. Epstein and I never socialized. I did not have a personal relationship with Epstein, and my dealings with Epstein were quite infrequent. I would typically meet with him about every 3 weeks for anywhere from 30 to 90 minutes. And our conversations were 90% regarding, the questions I brought in and was looking to get answered regarding his accounting and financial situation.
Did you ever at any point consider Mr. Epstein to be a friend of yours?
No.
And you mentioned that you would meet on approximately a 3 weeks or so cadence in person. Outside of those physical face-to-face meetings, how often would you otherwise communicate with Mr. Epstein?
I would say that 80% of my communication with Epstein was on email. And the remaining was phone calls. I could probably count on one hand the amount of times I called Epstein. It was always him calling me. And that was the extent when he would call me on the phone, email, and then in-person meets. 2010, I began in 2005. The in-person meetings were always at his townhouse in New York.
And you specifically broke out a portion of time after 2010. Prior to 2010, where would a majority of those meetings take place?
Well, I began work in 2005, and I believe that Epstein was incarcerated in, I believe, June of 2008. So for the period of time 2005 to 2008, those meetings were at our office at 457 Madison Avenue.
And did the nature of your relationship with Mr. Epstein ever change over the course of your years of employment with him?
My relationship with him was always strictly professional. We never had a personal relationship or socialized, so I don't believe it changed at all.
And how long did you work for Mr. Epstein?
I worked from October 2005 through the date that Epstein was incarcerated, and then I continued to serve as co-executor.
And when did you officially become co-executor of Mr. Epstein's estate?
I believe that occurred in August 2019.
So sometime shortly after his death.
Yes.
When was the last time you communicated with Mr. Epstein prior to his death?
I believe that Epstein was in Paris prior to him flying back and being arrested in New Jersey on July 6th. I believe I spoke with him probably or communicated via email or phone in the 3 or 4 days prior to his arrest.
Do you know why Mr. Epstein was in Paris at that time?
No.
And at the time of that last discussion, what were the two of you discussing?
I recall this from seeing recent media reports, but we were discussing his pursuit of a property in Morocco.
And what about that pursuit of the property in Morocco?
Epstein was looking to purchase a property in Morocco and was giving me instructions on what amount of money to wire to his real estate representative based on what I believe was a purchase of a home in Morocco.
And did you ever visit Mr. Epstein while he was incarcerated after his arrest in July of 2019?
I never visited Epstein in 2019 or 2008.
When was the last time you saw Mr. Epstein in person?
I don't recall a specific date. My, presumption would be it would be within 2 or 3 weeks of his arrest, but I can't specify a date.
And understanding you can't specify a date, do you know why you met with Mr. Epstein in person at that time?
My meetings with Epstein were, as I said earlier, usually every 3 weeks, and I was handling a lot of things on behalf of Epstein at the time. So I typically would come into a meeting with a list of, 30 to 50 questions, looking to get answers. The purpose of almost every one of my meetings was to try to, work down my list and get answers to things that I was working on.
And those 30 to 50 questions you would, often ask, what types of questions would you be asking at that time?
If an employee was looking for a raise and they came to me, I was going to ask if he was interested in giving a raise, if he was doing construction at a property, and the contractor was looking for payments per the agreement. I wanted to make sure he was comfortable with the work in place. If I was renewing his aviation insurance policy, I wanted to let him know what the premiums were for the next period of time. Those were some examples.
Would some of these questions involve disbursements of payments to or from entities of Mr. Epstein's to various employees as well?
I'm not sure I understand what your question is.
As part of these 30 to 50 questions that you would ask Mr. Epstein, you mentioned that you would talk about raises or construction projects and their payments, insurance policies, and renewing them. Would you also discuss any type of payments that you would okay to go from one of the entities of Mr. Epstein to individuals on the payroll?
Well, if the individual was on a payroll, the payment would be the same every week unless that person was asking for a raise. If you're asking if Epstein wanted to wire money to an individual that maybe was it or wasn't on the payroll, those were never questions that I initiated or asked. Those were usually directives I received from Epstein.
Understood. Did you have any knowledge or suspicion that prior to August of 2019, you would become co-executor of Mr. Epstein's estate?
Not that I recall. There were earlier documents, I believe, that I was in, but I don't recall that I would be the co-executor, the named co-executor, when he changed his documents a few days before his death.
And did you subsequently review any documents that would have indicated when this decision would have been made to name you as co-executor?
I believe that after Epstein's death, I was asked if I would take on the role as co-executor and co-trustee. And I thought about it for a little period of time, and I believe I signed the documents maybe 10 to 15 days after his death.
And were you surprised that you were named to be a co-executor of his estate?
No, I wasn't surprised.
And why were you not surprised?
I wasn't surprised because I thought performing accounting and bookkeeping services on behalf of Epstein, I would be best suited to know his assets.
And sorry to jump around in the timeline here, but in 2005, Mr. Epstein was, the investigation into Mr. Epstein in Florida began. I know you started your employment with Mr. Epstein in 2005. Prior to his arrest in 2006, were you aware of any investigations into Mr. Epstein?
I was not aware of any investigations, nor was I aware of the fact that Epstein was arrested. I found out about Epstein's legal problems when we had a discussion in 2008.
And who was part of that discussion in 2008?
The discussion was Epstein and myself.
And what did you discuss?
Epstein said he wanted to talk with me and mentioned that he was having legal problems in Florida. And he mentioned that he was with a woman that turned out to be a minor and that he was going to be charged with soliciting a minor for prostitution. Epstein then told me that it was a mistake that he was with this minor and that it would never happen again.
Where did this conversation occur?
I don't recall where it occurred. But
Was-
that's the conversation that I recall.
Was it, do you recall if it was in person or over a phone or anything like that?
I don't recall.
And when Mr. Epstein informed you of his legal problems and that he had been with a minor, were you surprised by that fact?
Yeah, I was surprised. I'd just been working for this man for a few years. So it was shocking to me, and it was quite upsetting. I know at the time that the crime was very serious. However, his sentence was rather light. I believe he served 13 months, of which he was allowed to leave the county jail 6 days a week for 12 hours a day. So I didn't fully grasp at the time, nor was I aware of the depth of what actually took place that I later learned as co-executor. But at the time, I unfortunately and regrettably trusted Epstein that this would never happen again, and I decided to stay working for him.
And did Mr. Epstein inform you of the interaction he had with this minor woman at that time?
The only thing he told me was, excuse me, he was mistakenly with a minor and that he would never be with a minor again. That was a mistake on his part.
But no specifics about what he was doing with this minor?
No.
Did you discuss Mr. Epstein's legal problems with anyone else at that time?
I don't recall having any other substantive conversations with anyone else, and I don't believe I knew much more than what Epstein told me.
You didn't discuss his legal issues with anyone else that you worked with?
I think everyone was, alarmed and scared that their employer was arrested, but I mean, there may have been some office chatter, but I can't recall the specific conversation.
And did you discuss how his legal problems and subsequent incarceration would affect his financial accounting?
Well, at the time, Epstein wanted to continue to employ everyone. He didn't want to fire people. And I know at the time, everyone that continued working for him received a pay cut of, I believe, 10%. And that was, what I recall from the time period. And additionally, that because Epstein was incarcerated, the amount of work that we all had diminished probably by about 30 or 40%.
And so outside of the 10% pay cut that employees faced, what other financial operations were changed during this time period of his incarceration in 2008?
Well, I would say, a lot of the transactions and work that would occur was when Epstein moved from property to property. So, for example, if Epstein was in New York and heading down to the U.S. Virgin Islands, to his islands, The property managers would want to make sure that the house was meticulous and that the landscaping was perfect and there was food in the refrigerator, and they were able to accommodate Epstein and whoever he was traveling with. So there was a lot of work done in anticipation of Epstein moving from home to home, which would lead to more expenses and me having more interactions with the household staff if they needed an increase on their credit line, or they needed cash to pay for bills or get things ready or purchase flowers. So in that regard, because he wasn't moving around from property to property, the amount and volume of transactions and work was diminished.
And did you receive a pay cut during this time?
Yes,
10%?
yes, every employee did.
And what was your pay at this time?
I believe my salary was $180,000, or somewhere in the $180,000 range. It could have been 185 or 190. I believe my starting salary was $180,000.
And I think you briefly touched on this, but after learning of Mr. Epstein's legal troubles, you of course ultimately decided to continue your employment with Mr. Epstein. Did you ever consider leaving or discuss leaving your
Yes.
employment?
Yes, 100%. I apologize for not alluding to that earlier. I, without a doubt, question leaving him. And in hindsight, I regret that I relied on Epstein's word that this would never happen again. And I believe at the time we were in the middle of a financial crisis and I had a family to support. So I made the wrong decision in working for him, because I later learned as co-executor that Epstein continued to abuse hundreds of minors and adults. So I made an improper decision.
And you briefly, I think, touched on this before, obviously knowing that you started in 2005 and before Mr. Epstein formally came to you with his legal troubles in 2008. Did you suspect that he was ever trafficking women, sex trafficking women, or abusing women or girls in any way?
No, I never suspected any of that.
Did anyone in Mr. Epstein's orbit ever express concern to you about Mr. Epstein and his dealings with women before his 2008 conviction?
Before his 2008 conviction, I never saw minors in the presence of Epstein. On my visits every 3 weeks when Epstein was in town, occasionally I saw assistants, but I never saw anything that looked improper. In addition, no woman has ever come to me and said that she was in danger, that she was being sexually abused or sexually trafficked.
And just so that the record is clear, saw no minors, no women outside of, or I'm sorry, no minors or girls present with Mr. Epstein at any time.
No, I'm not saying that I never saw minors. I'm saying, let me rephrase that. I never saw minors in Epstein's presence. Period, correct. Yes, that's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that occasionally, when Epstein was in the office, I did see his assistants, and no one ever approached me, communicated with me, and said that they were in danger or that they were being sexually abused or trafficked by Epstein.
Is it fair to say the assistants were adult females?
Correct, yes.
When did you become aware that Mr. Epstein had to register as a sex offender following his arrest and incarceration in 2008?
I believe I became aware, I assume, after he was to be released from jail.
And who did you learn that from?
I learned that from his attorney, Darren Endyke. And the context of how I learned that was that as a registered sex offender, he was required to make a list of all of his phone numbers, I believe all of his transportation, his planes, his cars, and I believe a list of his properties as well. So at times, Darren Endike would ask me questions about his properties or phone numbers or his aviation or cars.
What sorts of questions regarding the phone numbers, cars, properties, and aviation vehicles would you be answering or
I
providing?
believe there was a base list that Mr. Endike had, and if Epstein had purchased a new car, I assume it would have to be added to the list. So he might say to me, you know, has Epstein sold or purchased any cars in the last, you know, I don't know the period that he was reporting. So those were the questions I would be asked.
When did you first meet Ghislaine Maxwell?
I met Maxwell probably within the first, I'd say, 2 months of working for Epstein.
And what was the context of that first meeting?
I don't recall the context of the first meeting. I believe I was probably introduced to her. And that was the extent of my first meeting with her.
Introduced to Miss Maxwell by whom?
I don't recall.
Do you know where this meeting with Miss Maxwell took place?
It would have had to take place at the office because that's where I was every day.
And what did you discuss with Miss Maxwell in your first meeting?
As I said before, I don't recall the conversation, but my dealings with Maxwell when she was working in Epstein's office were predominantly regarding, she was a signatory on Epstein's accounts, and I would receive from Epstein's properties stacks of invoices of which I would review. And after I reviewed them, I would either bring them to her if she was at her desk or leave them on her desk for her to sign the checks and review them as well.
Were you surprised that Miss Maxwell was a signatory on accounts?
I knew Maxwell to be the equivalent of Epstein's chief of staff. So that was I was explained that she was number 2 to Epstein. So no, I wasn't surprised.
And at the time of your first interactions with Miss Maxwell, what was your understanding of what she did for a living outside of performing a chief of staff like duty as you just explained?
My understanding was that she had signatory authority, so she reviewed bills. And when I used the word chief of staff, I mean that she would travel with Epstein. She would interact with the property managers and the staff to make sure that the properties were the way Epstein wanted the properties to be. And that she, on occasion, traveled with Epstein as well.
And throughout your relationship or employment with Mr. Epstein and working with Miss Maxwell, did her role as sort of a chief of staff or a number 2 to Mr. Epstein, did that ever change?
Yeah, I believe that she was no longer involved in Epstein's day-to-day operations sometime in, I want to say, the 2009 to 10 range.
Do you know why her role changed in that 2009 to 2010 range?
I was never informed why her role changed, no.
Were you surprised that Miss Maxwell was no longer handling day-to-day things for Mr. Epstein anymore?
It's not something that I really thought about.
A person you would review invoices for and provide them to for final sign off. You didn't think about why she was leaving her role or her involvement in the day-to-day of Mr. Epstein?
I don't know why she left her role in the day-to-day. What I can tell you, though, is when Epstein was incarcerated, Maxwell had asked if I could help her with some of her finances. And I helped her organize her finances, sometimes during my working day and sometimes after work. I helped her organize her assets, her investments, her brokerage accounts, her cash, her insurances, her payroll. And I did that for a period of time. And after a period of time of doing that work, I was not paid by her, and I felt like my work was not appreciated. So I told Epstein that I no longer want to do work for Maxwell, and he said, "Great, don't do work for Maxwell," and that was the end of my dealing with Maxwell.
Did you ever have the impression that Miss Maxwell and Mr. Epstein had a romantic relationship with each other?
I was never aware of Epstein's romantic relationships, but there was, I'd say, office chatter, or people said that at one point in time they did have a romantic relationship, but I can't say I know that with confidence.
Do you recall who would have been engaging in this office chatter talking about their relationship?
Could have been any of the 6 to 10 employees that were in the office. I don't know.
And how would you characterize your relationship with Miss Maxwell?
Our relationship was, cordial, but as I said just previously, at the period of time where Epstein was incarcerated and I was doing work for Maxwell, working very hard and not being paid, I felt my work was underappreciated, so I had no desire to deal with her at that point in time anymore.
Would you consider Miss Maxwell a friend?
No.
Would you consider yourselves close?
No.
How often would you, knowing that after you provided services to Miss Maxwell and then no longer wanted to provide those services, prior to that, how often would you see Miss Maxwell?
Prior to that,
Yeah.
I'd see probably Maxwell at the same cadence I saw Epstein. I might see her every 2 or 3 weeks. I don't recall specifically, but it was not often.
And outside of face-to-face interactions, how frequent would you communicate with Miss Maxwell?
Not frequently at all.
If you did communicate with her, what would you use to communicate with her? Phone, email, text message, etc.?
Similar to Epstein, I rarely ever called Maxwell. It would either be email or in-person meeting.
Did Ghislaine Maxwell ever try to introduce you to any women or girls during her time in Mr. Epstein's orbit?
No.
Did Miss Maxwell ever ask you to introduce her to any women or girls in your orbit?
No.
When, let me go back. So you provided some financial services to Miss Maxwell in the 2009, 2010 timeframe, you said. And after you felt that your work wasn't valued, you no longer wanted to work with her. Is that when your relationship, professional or otherwise, ended with Miss Maxwell?
I believe that is correct. That after that, there may have been an email here or there, but I was no longer providing services, nor did I feel the need to communicate with her at all.
And when was the last time you communicated with Miss Maxwell?
I don't recall. Probably sometime in the 2010 range. I don't recall any substantive emails or conversations thereafter.
prior to Ms. Maxwell leaving Mr. Epstein's orbit in the 2009-2010 timeframe, was Ms. Maxwell heavily involved in Mr. Epstein's business dealings?
When you say the word business, do you mean financial stocks and bonds, or do you mean his properties and caretakers?
Let's start with the first one, stocks, bonds, investments,
I
etc.
don't recall Maxwell being involved with his investments at all.
And then with his properties, assets, airplanes, vehicles,
That was the majority of what I understood her role to be, yes.
and she was primarily performing functions of a signatory on invoices and payments.
Well, she was more than just a signatory. She was someone that had signatory authority at the banks, but she was also interacting with the pilots, with the property managers to make sure that the properties were to Epstein's liking. And if they needed to purchase something, she would be, generating or initiating that process.
You mentioned there were 6 to 10 people in your office in this, I guess, pre-2009, 2010 timeframe. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, that is correct.
And with those 6 to 10 people in your office, would they have routinely communicated with Jeffrey Epstein?
Could you explain what you mean by routinely?
Were they on their own accord having conversations, meetings, phone calls, emails with Mr. Epstein?
I can't speak on behalf of others. I will say that for the time that I worked in Epstein, was my client, everyone had their own relationship with Epstein. So, my involvement with Epstein would be regarding whatever I was working on at the time, his properties, his construction projects, his planes, later in my employment, his investments. But another individual or an accountant might be talking about his investments. The meetings when we were working at 457 were more one-on-one with Epstein. Later thereafter, we would have group meetings at his townhouse.
And who would be at those group meetings at his townhouse?
The group meetings were typically myself, Darren Endyke, Bella Klein, Harry Beller, Emad Hanner, I believe it's Hanna. Our IT person, I believe at the time it was William Murphy, Leslie Groff. There may have been 1 or 2 more names, but that's what I remember.
And Mr. Endyke was Mr. Epstein's primary attorney, is that correct?
That's my understanding.
And what role did Ms. Klein provide to Mr. Epstein?
She was a bookkeeper for Epstein.
She worked with you primarily?
Well, we all worked for 2 companies over the years. But she, as I was saying earlier, everyone had their own relationship with Epstein. So we all kind of had our own roles. We would work together because we were both accountants and bookkeepers, but I didn't view her as my assistant. We kind of each had our areas that we worked on.
And by saying that she was a bookkeeper, what does that mean?
She kept the QuickBooks file for Epstein. She handled his checks. She handled his credit cards. She handled his petty cash. She paid bills on behalf of Epstein personally, as well as many other entities.
How did her role differ from your role?
So that was her role. So I didn't do any of that stuff. My role would be reviewing checks from properties, bills that came in, dealing with property managers. As I said earlier, reviewing his investments, dealing with Epstein's insurance for himself and for his employees, his health insurance, his dental insurance, his property insurance, his aviation insurance, his life insurance. I dealt with construction projects. When Epstein was decorating a property, somehow I inevitably always was involved with the architect, engineer, or designer. I was involved with Epstein. If he was hiring employees and hiring a recruiter, I would be the point person. So I did many functions, but none of the functions that Bella Klein did.
And Mr. Beller, what was his role?
Mr. Beller's role was specific to Epstein's investments in stocks and bonds and derivatives. Mr. Beller provided the accounting for Epstein for his personal investments as well as his clients.
And Ahmad Hanna, what was his role?
Ahmad Hanna was like a project controller. So, he would focus on big projects and really interface with the employees. And some of the stuff that I mentioned that I did, Ahmad Hanna used to do previously, but when he left employment, I started doing that. So if Epstein wanted to purchase a car for himself or for an individual, Ahmad Hanna would handle that. But I later assumed those responsibilities when he was no longer employed.
And as a project controller, I presume that includes things like purchasing vehicles. What else would that include?
Purchasing vehicles, if at one point in time, Epstein was doing a lot of construction on his island, Little St. James, and they set up, I guess what you call a batch plant, where they were making cement live on the property. I guess it was more cost effective. So Epstein must have hired 30, 40 people at the time, and he was involved dealing with the construction manager and making sure that the costs were in line and setting up budgets and timelines for the start to the finish of that project.
And when you first started with Mr. Epstein in 2005, were you part of the New York Strategy Group?
Yes, the first entity that I worked for was New York Strategy Group.
And generally, what did the New York Strategy Group do as a whole?
New York Strategy Group was an entity that provided accounting, bookkeeping, and legal services for Epstein.
And does New York Strategy Group still exist?
No.
Why does it not still exist?
I believe it was dissolved in around 2012. I don't know why it no longer exists, but I do know that the two entities that followed after New York Strategy Group were HBRK Associates, which I was part of, and that was the accounting and bookkeeping services. And the next entity was, I believe, DKI PLLC, which was the legal entity that was run by Darren Endike.
What does HBRK stand for?
HB is Harry Beller, RK is Richard Kahn.
And you mentioned when you first started, you worked at the 457 Madison Avenue location, is that correct?
Yes.
And did Mr. Epstein have an office there during that time?
Epstein had an office at 457 Madison from the time I started up until the time he was incarcerated.
How often would he come to the office?
About every 3 weeks.
And did the rest of the staff, including you, Mr. Beller, Mr. Endike, and Ms. Klein, all have an office at 457 Madison?
At 457 Madison, I believe it was 4 rooms. There was one room that was the accounting room, and that was myself. It was Bella Klein, Harry Beller, and Ahmad Hanna. There were 4 desks. Another office was Darren Endike at his own office. And then there was another office with, I believe, 3 desks whereby it was the IT person that had a desk there. Maxwell had a desk there, and there was one more desk. I believe the woman's name was Helen Kim, who sat at that desk. Then there was I guess I said 4 before, there's actually 5 offices. Leslie Groff, who was Epstein's executive assistant, had her own office, and that was right outside of Epstein's office.
What was Miss Helen Kim's role?
She might have been an assistant to Maxwell. I don't recall her specific role, but we didn't really overlap, so I'm not sure.
And you said the New York Strategy Group was closed down in 2012, and subsequently HBRK came into existence. Why did New York Strategy Group close, and why was HBRK set up thereafter?
I don't recall the reason why New York Strategy Group closed. New York Strategy Group, just to clarify the record, New York Strategy Group was dissolved, I believe, in 2012, but it stopped operations whereby it employed staff. I believe the last year was 2008. 2009 was the first year that both HBRK and DKI PLLC began to employ staff. I don't recall, or I don't know why the entities switched, but I was asked if I would be okay, along with Harry Beller, in setting up an entity that we owned, and I didn't have an issue, so that was where we operated out of HBRK Associates.
And who asked you to make that decision?
I believe it was either Epstein or Endyke. I don't recall.
And whose idea was it to name the company after yourself and Harry Beller?
I believe Epstein said, you guys are going to form a company. Why don't you pick a name? So I believe we decided, not Epstein or Endyke.
And where, as in, let me backtrack. What office space did you operate out of when HBRK started?
So when HBRK started, we were still working at 457 Madison. At the time, 2009, Epstein was incarcerated, and the rent was very high. So we had a lease that was very expensive, and we were trying to break the lease. As Epstein was incarcerated and we were in a recession, we were trying to be more cost efficient. So I believe we continued working at 157 Madison until around May or June of 2010.
And where did you locate to after that?
For 2 years thereafter, both HBRK and DKI PLLC worked out of a apartment building at 301 East 66th Street.
And which apartment were you based out of inside of that building?
There were 2 apartments. I don't recall which one I was out of, but I know the 2 apartments were 10B and 10F.
And what was the layout of the apartments in which HBRK operated in?
HBRK's apartment was a 1-bedroom apartment, which had a living room, dining room, and 3 desks were set up. The 3 desks in the living room, dining room were Harry Beller, Emad Hanna, and at the time, William Murphy, but then we had a subsequent new IT person. And in the bedroom were Bella Klein and myself.
Did anyone live in this space, or is it primarily just an office space?
It was a residential space that was converted into an office. So at the time we were working there, there was no one living there.
And who suggested that you move to this space?
I presume Epstein, but I don't recall.
Do you know why you were asked to move to this space?
I think, as I mentioned earlier, the 457 Madison rent, I think it was $40,000 or $50,000 a month. It was a very fancy, elegant space that Epstein probably wanted for when he was there and dealing with clients, but he was not looking to spend that type of money when he was incarcerated, and we were just performing work on his behalf.
Were you aware that Mr. Epstein was affiliated with the 301 East 66th Street building?
I recall that Epstein was affiliated with 301. I know he had access to about 10 to 12 apartments. My understanding was that 301 East 66th Street was a co-op that tried to convert to a condo, and I guess I'd call it a failed conversion. And I don't know if Epstein put the deal together or knew the players involved, but I knew, my understanding was that that was how he had access to some apartments.
Did Mr. Epstein pay the salaries for HBRK?
HBRK was an outside accounting and bookkeeping service, and on an annual basis, we would prepare a budget for the salaries, for the operating expenses, the rent, the office supplies, whatever cost we thought we would incur for the year, and we would bill Epstein, and he would usually pay our services for 1 year in advance.
And which entity of Mr. Epstein's would pay for these services 1 year in advance?
I don't recall. It could have been either one or two of his entities. It could have been his personal, which I believe it was, or maybe one of his businesses, but I don't recall exactly.
We'll get more into various entities later, but what was his personal entity?
It was just Jeffrey Epstein.
How did Mr. Epstein act around women in your presence?
I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. When you refer to women, are you referring to employees or assistants or?
Employees, assistants, other women he would have around him at any given time?
I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, but again, the cadence that I saw him was not very frequent. So I saw him every 3 weeks and never saw anything that seemed unusual or that anyone was ever under distress.
Did you ever witness Mr. Epstein receive a massage from any woman or girl?
No.
Did you ever witness Mr. Epstein have sexual contact of any kind with a young woman or girl?
No.
Did Mr. Epstein ever discuss sexual acts of any kind with you?
No.
Did he ever discuss getting any massages with you?
No.
Was it common for Mr. Epstein or Miss Maxwell to bring young women or girls to any other places where the two of you would meet?
The only place I ever met Epstein was at the office, 457 Madison, or his townhouse. So I'm not sure I understand the context of your question. There was no other places that I met Epstein or Maxwell.
Did he bring young women to those meetings?
Thank you, Ken. Occasionally, there might be someone. When we met at Epstein's townhouse, we met in a dining room similar to a long table like this, and I would be in a meeting with Epstein. On occasion, an assistant might walk in for 30 seconds, say something to Epstein, and then leave. There was never any women present in my meetings with Epstein.
Did anyone check the date of births of any employees on the payroll?
When we received, we would hand, I usually would hand out a employment package to new employees, and I would receive their information with date of birth. And if they were on the insurance plan, I would receive their personal information as well. In addition, when we prepared gift tax returns, if Epstein was reporting a taxable gift, we were required to know that individual's date of birth.
Would you verify those individuals' date of births?
In New York State, I believe that you're required to have working papers from either your school or from your parents if you're a minor. I never saw any working papers in New York, so I knew there were no minors. that were working for Epstein on his payroll. And for the dates of birth, when we saw the gifts, there was nothing, that was alarming, that stood out. So when you say, did I ever verify them? I wasn't in tune, saying was every date, making sure it was a minor, but I never saw a date of birth that was a minor, with the exception of potentially one gift that was to what I believe was a family friend of Epstein's.
And who was that family friend of Epstein's?
Epstein made gifts to, and she was reported on his gift tax returns.
And do you recall what that gift was at the time? That she was a minor?
Yeah, I believe he purchased for her gift cards, American Express gift cards.
Do you know how much value was for those gift cards?
Probably somewhere in the $10,000 to $15,000 range.
Did you ever have any sexual contact with any young woman or girl introduced to you by Epstein or Maxwell?
No,
Did you ever receive any massages from any young woman or girl brought to you or introduced to you by Epstein and Maxwell?
no.
We will conclude our first hour there and go off the record.
We are on the record. Mr. Kahn, good morning.
Good morning.
I understand from your testimony in the previous round that you first became aware of Jeffrey Epstein's arrest in Florida through a conversation you had with him in 2008. Is that correct?
Yes,
Do you recall the date of Mr. Epstein's arrest?
his arrest, I do not know the date. I know when he was incarcerated. I believe it was June 30th, 2000.
I'm going to ask the court reporter to mark as Exhibit A an email. It's a thread initiated by you to Mr. Epstein. I'll give you a moment to review it. Could I ask you to read the first email into the record?
When you say the first email, from the bottom?
At the bottom, yes, the one dated July 28th, 2006.
Bottom up,
Yes.
it says, I know it has been a challenging week. I support you 100%. If there's anything I can do for you, please let me know.
And the email is sent by you to Mr. Epstein, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And what were you referring to there when you talked about a challenging week?
I don't recall.
So I'll represent to you that Mr. Epstein was arrested on July 23rd, 2006.
Okay.
Is there anything you could have been referring to in that email other than his arrest?
I don't recall this email, so it's hard for me to make comment on what I knew.
It appears from this communication that you've actually learned of Mr. Epstein's arrest in July of 2006 rather than 2008, as you testified in the previous round.
That's not correct. I testified to what I recall to a conversation I had in 2008. This email does not say, I know that you were arrested and it's been a challenging week. It says, I know it's been a challenging week and I support you. It does not say in this email, I know you were arrested. So I'm not going to testify to that.
Is there any other challenge you could have been referring to in this email, apart from his arrest?
As I said when I testified a few minutes ago, I don't recall this email, so I don't know what I was referring to.
I would like to return to the subject of the point in time when you started working for Mr. Epstein. Did you have a title?
I think Epstein referred To me and others from HBR Care, actually it was at the time New York Strategy Group, as accountants and bookkeepers.
You were asked during the previous round about Mr. Epstein's net worth, and I wanted to return to that topic as well. If I understood correctly, you said you didn't have complete visibility into that question at the onset of your employment, but I understood from your testimony in the last round that there came a point in time when you did. Is that fair?
So I believe the question earlier was Epstein was a wealthy man. And I testified that I understood he was a wealthy man because he had many homes and he had planes and other assets. And I said at the time, I was not handling his individual stocks and bonds or asset summaries. So I didn't know what his net worth was. I just knew he was a wealthy man. When Harry Beller left working for Epstein, excuse me, in I believe May of 2014, at that point in time, I began making asset summaries for Epstein.
Okay, so let's start at that point in time. What was Mr. Epstein's approximate net worth?
One additional clarification, the asset summaries that I was preparing only included Epstein's liquid assets, his investments in stocks, bonds. It might have been loans receivable. It might have been maybe an investment in a private company that was valued on a frequent basis, but it never included his homes. He never wanted to see his homes on there. So I can't accurately say it was a net worth statement. It was, a good portion of his assets, but not a total financial picture.
Okay, so we can break those apart. Liquid assets, what was the value as you understood?
Again, I don't recall what, at any given point in time, his liquid assets were worth. I do know he had hundreds of millions of dollars in stocks and bonds and investments. And I do know, as serving as co-executor, that when we filed his Form 706 estate tax return, it had somewhere between 500 and 600 million in assets.
And I'm sorry, just to clarify, I understood your testimony in the previous round with respect to your appointment as co-executor. You were not surprised at that appointment because you did have visibility into the value of his assets. Is that correct?
I thought Epstein would want me to serve as his co-executor, and I chose to serve as co-executor because I thought I knew his assets best.
However, it appears at the moment that you did not have complete command of his assets, if I'm understanding your answers correctly.
I don't think he said that at all. I think
Okay.
he said he doesn't recall in 2014 what the assets are worth. He
Right.
told you what they were worth at the time of the estate becoming formed. So I'm not sure your question.
So I'm sorry, I just want to make sure we're clear on what your understanding was at these various shifting points in time. You did have complete visibility into the totality of Mr. Epstein's assets at the time his estate was formed, but not prior to that. And I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, that's
Please,
not what I testified.
please clarify.
What I testified was, you had asked me what was his net worth, what was he worth, what was the value of his stocks and bonds. And I said, I don't recall any specific value from 2014 to 2019. I knew it was in the hundreds of millions of dollars. I then testified, I know at his date of death, when the estate tax return was filed, it was somewhere between, I think, 550 and $600 million. So I knew the totality of his assets, but I did not know, number one, his net worth at any given point in time, because we never included the homes, nor do I recall to a particular period. These reports were produced monthly, nor do I recall from 2014 to 19 what any monthly valuation would be.
Was part of your job duties the preparation of Mr. Epstein's tax returns?
I never prepared any tax returns for Epstein. He used outside accountants.
During the period of time that Mr. Epstein employed you, what were the sources of his wealth?
Epstein earned fees from his clients for financial, tax, and estate planning. Epstein made investments, so he had interest, dividends, made real estate investments, so he had passive income. That's what I understand the sources of his income to be.
If we could talk about the clients for a few minutes. How many clients did Mr. Epstein have? Again, this is during the period of your employment.
So I know clients to be individuals that paid income to Epstein's entities. And I believe during my period of time, somewhere between 5 and 10 clients Epstein had. However, there were many times that Epstein spent time talking to someone, trying to cultivate business, but that never occurred. So he might spend a year or two with what he would think would be a prospective client, and that person, maybe he gave them advice that was useful or not, but that client never paid fees. So I don't know if you would consider that to be a client. But, you know, in getting to the number 10, I think probably there were about 5 that he spoke to that never paid fees, and I'm aware of approximately 5 clients that paid fees over the years.
And I appreciate that distinction. If we could focus on the clients who did pay fees, who were they?
Dan, am I allowed to say?
So there are certain confidentiality agreements that Mr. Kahn has signed on to. So we have, just that issue with respect to that. I mean, I think these names are probably well known, but nonetheless, Mr. Kahn is bound by confidentiality agreements.
And do those confidentiality agreements set forth a complete bar to disclosure? Are there not exceptions for responses to questions duly posed by a congressional committee?
I don't recall exactly the language, but I don't believe there's any exception for a congressional committee. I think it's by law. I'm not sure if this qualifies by law. If you would, I think you could ask if, do you mind if we take a 2-minute break? I'll just talk to Mr. Kahn about this.
Sure. I'll just note for the record that from the minority's perspective, I won't speak for our majority colleagues. I mean, your client is under an obligation pursuant to subpoena to respond to all of our questions today. So
We'd love to do it.
Leave it there. And yes, we can go off the record.
And John, you can ask that question again.
Again, my question, Mr. Kahn, you referred to 5 clients of Jeffrey Epstein who paid fees to him during the period of your employment. And so I would ask you to identify those 5 clients.
The first client that paid fees that I'm aware of is Les Wexner. The next client that paid fees was either Glenn Dubin individually or his entity, Highbridge Capital. The next client was an individual named Stephen Sinofsky. I believe Rothschild paid fees.
Rothschild, is that an individual or an entity?
I don't recall. I don't recall how the income was received, but I believe it was from, maybe Ariana Rothschild or one of her affiliated entities. And Leon Black, I believe, was the 5th.
Thank you. If we could break those down, I'd just like to ask you about the services that Mr. Epstein provided to each of those 5, starting with Les Wexner.
I am not aware of the services that Epstein provided to Les Wexner because I was not involved in working with Epstein or anyone from New York Strategy Group on that account. I had no interface with Les Wexner and Epstein's fee income.
And again, this is cabined to the period of your employment. How much did Mr. Wexner pay Jeffrey Epstein?
I don't know.
And then Glenn Dubin, same questions.
Glenn Dubin, I remember seeing income come in for the sale of Highbridge. I don't recall a specific amount. I think it was somewhere between 15 and $25 million, but I don't recall the specific number. And the income may have come in before I began working there. But I do recall at one point seeing an invoice and a fee.
And that was in connection with the sale of Highbridge Capital.
That is my understanding.
And the services that Mr. Epstein provided to Mr. Dubin in connection with that sale were what?
My understanding, again, I was not involved in that work, but my understanding was that he advised on the sale of Highbridge Capital to JP Morgan.
And then Leon Black.
Leon Black, I was involved in the work on that account, and Epstein provided tax, estate planning, and financial consulting work to Leon Black. And that is what he received fee income for.
And how much did Mr. Black pay him?
I don't recall the exact amount. I believe it was somewhere in the range of $150 million.
And with respect to the tax and estate planning consulting work, what specific issues was Jeffrey Epstein advising him about?
There were many things that Epstein was working on for Leon Black. I think the first thing that Epstein did, at least that I was aware of, so I'm only speaking from what I'm aware of, what I was involved in. I don't know about Mr. Black and Epstein's conversations that they had regarding the work, so I can't speak to what Epstein provided consulting on. But I know that I believe when Epstein first started working with Black, Leon Black had a family office that was very understaffed. So one of the first things that Epstein helped Black with was staff up a proper-sized family office. So we were involved in the hiring of individuals to support Black's assets and his needs. We were involved in reviewing his trusts, his holdings, how he held art, how he held investments. I know Epstein did a lot of talk with Leon Black regarding his TRA, which I believe is a tax receivable asset. We reviewed the structure of how Leon Black held his planes. His planes were managed by an outside entity. So we reviewed the expenses for his planes and I believe his boat. We dealt with one of the hires that Leon Black made was he hired an estate attorney and an art consultant. So the majority of our meetings revolved around estate planning, whereby they would produce a book that would include all of Mr. Black's assets, and they would run through different scenarios based on where Apollo stock was and how that would impact his estate.
Don't go into what the attorney says.
Okay.
Don't
Sorry.
tell what Black's attorney says.
So we did estate planning.
It appears that you are rather closely familiar with the scope of the work that Mr. Epstein did for Leon Black, but not for Les Wexner. Why is that?
Because I began working for Epstein in October of 2005, and I was never involved on that account. Harry Bella was working there at the time. So Harry Bella was handling all of the trusts. He was handling all the investments. It just, I guess it was well-staffed and I wasn't needed. And I believe shortly thereafter, that relationship between Epstein and Mr. Wexner ended.
What was your understanding as to why that relationship ended?
I don't know why it ended, but I do know it ended around the time of his incarceration.
Of Mr. Epstein's incarceration in 2008?
Correct.
And then just to round out the list, Mr. Kahn, Steven Sinofsky, do I have that right?
That was one of the names I mentioned that Epstein received fees from.
Who is Mr. Sinofsky?
I don't know, let me rephrase that. At the time, I didn't know who he was. I've seen subsequent press reports in the last 6 months to a year. I understand that Mr. Sinofsky used to work at Microsoft. However, I have no knowledge of what work Epstein did for Mr. Sinofsky to receive those fees.
And then lastly, Ariana Rothschild.
My understanding for that was that Epstein was doing estate planning on their behalf, and I did attend a few meetings with Miss Rothschild's team, along with some of Epstein's staff.
Do you know how much money Mr. Sinofsky paid Jeffrey Epstein?
I believe it was $5 million.
And what about Ms. Rothschild?
I think it was 20 or $25 million.
Just a few follow-up questions related to Mr. Epstein's incarceration in Florida. Did you or anyone else ever make any payments in connection with Epstein's incarceration or work release? I can be more specific.
Could you
Payments
with
with
payments?
Yeah. Payments with the goal of securing for Mr. Epstein better treatment, either in prison or on his work release.
I'm not aware of any payments that relate to what you just mentioned.
And to your knowledge, did you or anyone else ever make any payment on behalf of Jeffrey Epstein to any law enforcement officer?
Not that I'm aware of, although I do believe when Epstein had office hours in Florida, he was required to have, I don't know what the right term is, a guard or someone that was present either in his office or outside his office. I believe that might have been, I don't know if that answers your question or relates to your question, but that might have been something that he was responsible to pay for.
Were you involved in making that payment?
I don't recall.
Was any payment ever made by you or anyone else on behalf of Jeffrey Epstein to Alex Acosta?
Not that I'm aware of.
And did you ever become aware of Jeffrey Epstein paying the fees for attorneys for victims in the Florida case?
Could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Sure. Did you ever become aware of Jeffrey Epstein paying for the attorneys who represented victims in the Florida case?
I don't recall. I wasn't that familiar with that at the time.
I'd like to shift gears and talk a little bit more about 301 East 66th Street, the building where I understand you had an office for a period of time. We've talked about the office arrangement. I'd like to ask you whether there were women connected to Jeffrey Epstein who were also living at 301 East 66th.
Women or only women or the men too?
Start with the women.
At the time, Epstein had, I believe, 10 to 12 apartments at 301 East 66th Street. So let's just say for this example, there were 10 apartments. The offices 10B and 10F were two out of the 10 apartments. I believe there was a period of time, and I'm not speaking to a specific year. I'm going to just speak generally speaking because I don't recall the dates where people occupied apartments, but I know of the apartments that Epstein had. Some of his assistants did have apartments. I believe Sarah Kellen had an apartment. I believe Nadia Marcinkova had an apartment. I believe at one point in time, Svetlana had an apartment. I believe at one point in time, an employee of Eva Dubin's, maybe a housekeeper, had an apartment. I believe two of the pilots had apartments. I believe that Lynn, his housekeeper from 90 71st Street, had an apartment. And I think there was always a couple of guest apartments that he kept open for guests or friends that would come in town that he would be able to use those apartments for.
If I could back up for a second, you said that Mr. Epstein had 10 to 12 apartments in the building. Did he own those units?
That's a good question. I don't believe he owned those apartments, and I was not familiar with the arrangement. What I understood was that on a few of the apartments, Epstein paid rent. So let's just say, for example, $2,000 a month. And on the remainder of the apartments, Epstein was billed annually, and he would pay for the operating expenses of those apartments. So, for example, the equivalent as if it was a condo, he would pay the common charges and the real estate taxes, and I believe the utilities may have been included in that payment as well. So we were billed annually for the majority of the apartments.
So it's fair to say that he covered the cost of housing for the people who occupied those units.
Yes, with a few exceptions. There were a few individuals over time that did pay rent.
Okay. Did any of the women you just identified pay rent?
I believe over a period of time, there were some women that paid rent.
Who?
I believe Jen Kalin and Karina Shuliak paid rent at one point in time. Paid rent. I think at one point in time, John Luke had an apartment. He paid rent. Trying to think if there are others. Maybe there was one other apartment, but I don't recall who that was.
As to the individuals for whom Mr. Epstein did pay rent, was it your job to make those rent payments on his behalf?
The individuals that paid rent directly to the management company. The rent didn't come to Epstein. But when Epstein was billed, as I mentioned earlier, at the end of the year, I believe Epstein's New York entity, NES LLC, paid the costs of the apartments at 301 East 66th Street.
Was that you or Bella who do that?
Bella, the bill would come to me by OSA Properties. I would review the bill, Epstein would approve it, and Bella Klein would make the payment.
I am going to ask the court reporter to mark as Exhibit B an email thread between yourself and Leslie Groff dated November 7th, 2014.
Okay.
Mr. Kahn, I'm going to ask you about some of the individuals referenced in this email. Before I do that, I just want to make a request for the record to the majority to ensure that to the extent any of my questions today elicit the identity of any actual or potential Epstein survivors, that those names and any information from which they could be identified are fully redacted prior to any public release of the transcript. Now, as to this email, Mr. Kahn, starting at the bottom, you are emailing Ms. Groff for a breakdown of, well, why don't you read that sentence into the record?
Okay, on November 7th,
Yes.
2014, I wrote to Leslie Groff, can you please send me latest breakdown of apartments I wrote alts, but it means apartments for 301. Thanks.
And why were you asking Ms. Groff for that?
The reason that I was inquiring about the status of the apartments was that the individuals that stayed at Epstein's apartments were receiving a benefit from Epstein because he was paying the expenses. So it was my job to assemble the information for Epstein's gift tax returns. And I needed to make sure that I knew who was living in the apartment and for what period of time, so that that could be properly reported on Epstein's gift tax returns.
If we could focus on the second email, and I'll start from the top of the list. There's a reference to 2G, and I take that to be the apartment unit. Is that correct?
2G, yes.
Okay. Who do you know, looking at this email, who the individual whose name is redacted here is?
No, I was going to say, I'm assuming everyone's sheet is redacted. Right, I can't tell you, I don't know who was ever in any apartment other than what I said earlier, we were in 10B and 10F, but.
Well, Ms. Groff sent you a list identifying the occupants of these units, right?
Right, but I guess what I'm trying to say, and forgive me for not being clear, I don't recall the specifics of this email at the time. I know why I asked for the apartments, but I don't remember from 2014 who was in any apartment now, looking at it today. And unfortunately, the names that you're asking me for are redacted.
So I'll just go down the list. 3M also redacted.
Yes.
Do you know who that individual is?
No.
Do you know whether the individuals referenced with respect to 2G and 3M were female?
I don't know who the names are of 2G and 3M as they're redacted, so I can't answer that question.
5P is Lynn and JoJo.
Yes.
Who are they?
Lynn and JoJo were Epstein's housekeeper and driver for 9 East 71st Street.
And 7J is Jean-Luc.
Yes.
And who is that individual?
I believe Jean-Luc was a friend of Epstein's.
Okay, and I will return to him at a later point today. 8A, guest apartment. 8C, JE brother kids. Who's that referring to?
I think when I was pondering before, I thought maybe there was another apartment that paid. I believe that Epstein was paying for his brother's apartment. Joyce might be a reference to Mark Epstein's first wife. And Epstein was providing apartments for his kids, possibly. That's what I assume from this.
Moving further down the list, 8H, name redacted. Do you know who that individual is?
No.
Do you know whether that person was female?
No.
10F, also redacted. Do you know who that individual is?
No.
Do you know if that person was female?
No.
And 10N, again, name redacted. Do you know who that individual is?
I do not.
Was that individual female?
I do not know.
11E, once again, redacted.
I do not know who that individual was.
Okay. And 11J, also redacted.
In the parentheses, redacted, I do not know who, I do not know what the redaction relates to.
So going back to the roster of individuals who connected to Mr. Epstein, who had units in the building, how many of those were female? And I'm going to exclude Lynn and JoJo from that list.
Are you including the kids?
Not including the kids.
And do you want them to speculate based on the redactions?
No.
So if I understand your question, you're asking me this list of apartments from November 4th?
I'm asking independent of this email. What women do you recall having been in the building, women who were connected to Jeffrey Epstein?
What women do I recall living in the building at any point in
At
time?
any point in time.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying. Sarah Kelly,
Mm-hmm.
Nadia Marcinkova, Svetlana, I don't recall her last name, it's with a P. I believe Sue Hamlin had an apartment at one point in time. There may be a few more names, but I don't recall. That's what comes to mind.
And of that list, what was the age range?
Range, but I could tell you, I know that none of those women were minors.
Were any of them, to your understanding, above the age of 30?
As I said before, I do not know their age range, but I do know that none of those women were minors.
How do you know that?
Because, as I said and testified earlier, I was required to obtain their date of birth for either employment records or for gift tax returns.
And what was your understanding as to the nature of their relationship to Jeffrey Epstein?
Some of the women that were mentioned were assistants that worked for Epstein.
Were these women, from your perspective, women who would generally be perceived as attractive?
I can't make that judgment. You're asking me if I thought these women were attractive?
Sure.
It's
not a fair question.
Yeah, he can't answer that question. I mean, everyone has their own view of it. And if you're getting at something, if you want to say, did you think they were being abused? Just ask him that question.
No, I'm interested in his perception of their
I
attractiveness.
never looked and viewed at Epstein's assistants and made judgment on their looks.
Sitting here now and knowing these women, would you classify any of them as unattractive?
Yes,
Which ones?
I'm not answering that question. I'm not answering that question.
And to your understanding, did Mr. Epstein view these women as attractive?
I don't know how Epstein viewed any woman.
Were any of those women foreign?
I believe Nadia Marcinkova was foreign. Svetlana, I believe, was foreign, and was foreign.
What were their nationalities?
Eastern European, I don't recall the countries.
Russian?
Potentially, I don't recall the countries.
And what was your understanding as to how they came to know Jeffrey Epstein?
I didn't know how these women came to meet Mr. Epstein.
Did you ever ask him about that?
Did I ask Epstein how he met his assistants?
These women, yes.
The women that we're speaking about now?
Yes.
No,
Did you ever talk to anyone else about that?
no.
Did you ever understand that Jeffrey Epstein was engaging in sexual activity with any of those women?
Can you repeat your question, please?
Did you ever understand that Jeffrey Epstein was engaging in sexual activity with any of those women?
I was not aware of Epstein's personal and sexual relationships.
Did you think it was possible?
It's not something that I thought about.
Did you think it was possible that he was sexually abusing any of them?
I never thought it was possible that Epstein was sexually abusing them, because if I thought that, I would have never continued to work for Epstein.
Did you believe that the relationship between these women and Jeffrey Epstein was platonic?
I knew that these women worked for Epstein as assistants. I made no judgment if these women were girlfriends. What I knew is that none of these women were minors, and I also knew that none of these women ever came to me and said that they were in danger or that they were being sexually abused or trafficked by Epstein.
So we've talked about women at 301 East 66th. You've also mentioned being in Epstein's home. And specifically, if I understand correctly, his mansion on East 71st Street. Is that correct?
I visited Epstein's home at 90 71st Street approximately every 3 weeks for my meetings with Epstein.
And when you were present for those meetings, you observed women present in his residence. Is that also correct?
On my visits to Epstein's home, I saw women. The first woman I would see is usually when I would come into the building would be Leslie Groff, who had an office right off the stairway. I often would see Epstein's housekeeper, Lynn, sometimes another housekeeper by the name of Tess, and on occasion, either waiting for a meeting in Leslie's office for Epstein, I would see some of Epstein's assistants.
And when you say some of Epstein's assistants, are you referring to the women who resided at 301 East 66 that we were just discussing, or are these different women?
I'm referring to assistants of Epstein. I don't know where all of Epstein's assistants resided.
So I just want to be clear, because again, we're talking about the roster of women that you encountered. The ones that we're talking about you seeing in his residence are distinct from the list living at 301 East 66 that we talked
No,
about.
what I'm saying is you asked me the question, is every woman you saw at 90 71st Street who was an assistant of Epstein's, did they all live at 301 East 66th Street? And what I'm saying to you is I named 3 or 4 assistants of Epstein, and over my 14 years of working for Epstein, he had more than 3 or 4 assistants. So I don't know where some of these other women lived. And you're trying to reference to me, where did some of these other women live? I don't know. Maybe they lived at one point in time at 301. Maybe they lived somewhere else, but I can't answer that question.
Irrespective of their residence, the women that you observed in Epstein's mansion, what was the age range of those women?
I don't know the age range of the women that worked for Epstein as assistants, but I do know that none of them were minors.
Did any of them, to your observation, appear to be above the age of 30?
There probably were some, but I don't, as I keep testifying, I don't know the exact age of these women, but I believe that there were some assistants that were in their 30s, yes.
And how many of those women were also foreign?
I don't know.
Did you ever travel on Mr. Epstein's plane?
Yes, on 2 occasions I traveled on Epstein's plane. This was at a time when I was visiting his office in St. Thomas, the U.S. Virgin Islands. I purchased a round-trip ticket to go meet with his office employees in St. Thomas, and usually my trips to see his islands were revolving around a construction project. So as I alluded to before, just as an example, if he was running a batch plant and there was a big project going on, I may go down and look at the project because I was told many times that I was very tough in approving bills. So many times Epstein wanted me to see a project so I could better understand what was going on and pay those invoices quicker. So I typically went to visit his local office in St. Thomas, and on occasion would take a trip to his island during that visit to see a project or deal with staffing or employment issues. But on 2 of the visits whereby I purchased a round-trip ticket, Epstein was also in residence and asked if I would like a ride back to New York, whereby I said yes. And those were the 2 occasions I traveled on Epstein's plane.
And on those 2 trips, who else was on the plane with you?
On the first plane ride, and I don't recall the date, it was Darren Endyke, myself, Epstein, and I believe Sarah Kellen, plus the 2 pilots.
And that's both trips?
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. The second trip, it was myself, Epstein, an assistant, and the 2 pilots.
And who was the assistant?
I don't recall the assistant, but what I do recall specifically about that flight is that the pilots asked me if I wanted to sit in the cockpit and watch the whole plane process, which I said yes, and regretted that because it was pretty scary with the speed and watching it through the front window.
You have some questions for him.
Yes.
Thank you for your cooperation. I'm Representative Suhas Subramaniam from Virginia. Some of this may be a little redundant, but I appreciate you bearing with me. Did Jeffrey Epstein or anyone associated with him ever ask you to assist with anything illegal, or you may have construed to potentially be illegal during your time working for him?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Were you ever asked to do anything illegal yourself at any point?
Not that I'm aware of.
Were you ever asked, did you ever ask or inquire about the legality of any of these transactions or any of his actions?
Could you be more specific with your question, please?
In your capacity while working for him, did you ever inquire with either Jeffrey Epstein or any of his associates, including Darren and Dyke, about the legality of anything going on with Jeffrey Epstein at any point?
Are you asking if I ever saw a transaction that was alarming that I asked him a question about?
Yes.
Not that I'm aware of.
Did you ever see any transactions that you found alarming or found suspicious in any way?
I never saw a transaction in Epstein's books and records that said payment for sex, or I don't recall ever seeing any payments that said, for massages. So there was never anything in his ledger that alluded to that, if that's what you're asking.
And just to follow up to that, I'm not referring just to sex trafficking, but anything illegal, not just sex trafficking.
Not that I'm aware of.
And did you ever provide any financial advice or assistance to any women associated with Jeffrey Epstein, such as tax advice or just any informal financial advice?
About 4 or 5 of Epstein's assistants had asked if I would do a favor and prepare their tax returns.
Do you remember who they were?
I believe it was Karina Shuliak. Maybe her name's Lalasa, I'm not sure. There might have been 2 others, but those are the names that I recall.
So you mentioned in 2008, you'd heard about the arrest, but by 2019, is that when you started to learn about the extent of his crimes?
When the Miami Herald article came out, it was alarming because there was a lot more depth to what took place in 2008. And at the time, this was the time when we had just gotten dropped by Deutsche Bank.
So after he was dropped by banks, did you help him try to find new firms that would open accounts for him?
When Epstein was dropped by Deutsche Bank, I tried to help Epstein open up cash and brokerage accounts.
Did you ever help him withdraw cash amounts that wouldn't trigger federal reporting, specifically because that amount wouldn't trigger federal reporting?
I never had signatory on any of Epstein's accounts, with the exception of HBRK, which was my company. There was a company, a design company, that I had signatory authority for the sole purpose of processing payroll. I never signed any cash withdrawals from that. And at one point in time, one of his trusts, I had signatory authority, but all of his other accounts, I never had signatory authority until the last 6 months when Epstein was alive.
Did you ever withdraw cash for Jeffrey Epstein to pay for services or pay Jeffrey?
Not that I recall.
Did you ever, how are Jeffrey Epstein's employees generally paid? Were they paid through wire transfer or cash? Do you have any knowledge of that?
Epstein had assistants that were on payroll, and those were the employees. My assumption was those are the employees that were working full-time. But Epstein may have had other assistants that were not full-time that he may have paid via cash or wire transfer, but I'm not aware of that because I didn't travel with these individuals.
Were you ever in any financial transactions involving public figures such as politicians, political leaders, or heads of state?
Could you please repeat that?
Were you involved in any, or were you aware of or involved in any financial transactions involving Jeffrey Epstein or any public figures, political leaders, or heads of state?
public figures, well, financial trend.
Such as wire transfers, such as business dealings.
Would Leon Black be considered a public figure?
I would think anyone in like a government or anyone who's a public figure,
Politician.
An American politician?
any
or foreign.
politician around the world.
The only thing that comes to mind is that I believe Epstein invested in an entity, or I don't even know if it was his partner or what the original origins of, but with Ehud Barak.
And then were you aware of any financial transactions while you were employed there involving Jeffrey Epstein and the Trump family? Either before you'd been employed or after?
Never aware of any transactions between Epstein and the Trump family.
Thank you.
Ms. Walkinshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Kahn. I'm James Walkinshaw from Virginia, and I want to start by introducing Exhibit C, which is an email chain between Jeffrey Epstein and a redacted individual from September 13th, 2017, with the subject line Visa
Thank you.
Switzerland. We have a copy of it there. As I said, it's an email between Epstein and a person whose identity is redacted. The redacted sender emails Epstein asking what she should put down.
Excuse me 1 second. Could you mind if I read it for a second
Sure,
first?
go ahead.
Okay.
Okay, so as you saw in this email, the redacted sender emails Epstein asking what she should put down for her university application to explain, quote, who is the sponsor to me and on what grounds he provides me with financial support. Epstein then explains that the redacted person will have a sponsor paying for the full tuition. And she replies, quote, a full scholarship from Richard Kahn. I'm sorry, sir, but I don't see the connection. And then as you saw on page 3, Epstein replies, Richard has decided to pay for your school. That's all you need to know. He gives out scholarships, smiley face. And Mr. Kahn, have you seen this email before today? Do you
No.
recall seeing this email?
No, I've never seen this email.
Okay, so you're not familiar with this?
I believe I'm familiar with
The
the transaction,
situation? Okay,
but I'm not familiar with the email.
okay. And do you know who the sender is? Who is Epstein corresponding with here?
It might have been a woman by the name of,
Do you remember surname?
I believe it is with, I don't recall her last name.
Okay. What was your relationship to her? What is your relationship to her?
I did not have a relationship with her. My understanding of this transaction was that Epstein had asked me if HBRK, which was the entity that I operated out of, would sponsor this individual for her school. This woman was attending school in Switzerland for, I believe it was a finishing and hospitality school, and that Epstein was going to potentially hire her after the school, but he asked if my entity would pay the invoice for her school.
Had you ever met her?
I don't recall ever meeting this woman.
Okay. And beyond what you described, what did you understand Epstein's relationship to be with her?
I did not know Epstein's relationship with her.
And you didn't ask?
I didn't ask. What I was explained to understand was that Epstein was paying for tuition for this woman to attend a hospitality school. And I knew that from previously employing through HBRK individuals that provided hospitality services, where we called them property managers. We kind of overviewed all of the properties. Our entity, HBRK, has hired those individuals before. I thought that that's what this transaction related to.
In the email, Epstein says that you, quote, give out scholarships. What did you understand him to mean by that? And
I don't,
was that true?
I don't think that's an accurate statement that I personally give out scholarships. The entity,
Your business, HBRK.
HBRK, I don't recall, other than this, ever giving out a scholarship. So saying that HBRK or Richard Kahn gives out scholarships is not accurate. What I understood was that HBRK was funded, as I testified earlier. Usually we were funded for 1 year in advance. So for example, if the annual budget for HBRK was $900,000, we would earn $75,000 a month times 12 is $900,000. So that Epstein at times thought that HBRK was sitting with unearned revenue. So at times Epstein would ask HBRK to pay an expense out of the unearned revenue, and on occasion HBRK paid an expense. This to me was one example of him looking to pay for education for a woman attending finishing school in Switzerland.
Okay, I want to introduce Exhibit D, which is emails between Mr. Kahn and another redacted individual from September 14th, 2017, with the subject Gleon forms. As you can see, Mr. Kahn, this email exchange takes place the day after the one we previously discussed, presumably from the same sender, the same redacted individual discusses scholarships, tuition, and visas. And Lyon is a university in Switzerland. Have you seen this email before today?
I believe so.
Okay. And you know who the sender is?
I believe it's the same woman. Thank you.
Perhaps, okay. And again, did you have any knowledge or understanding of Epstein's relationship with her? Does this jog your memory in terms of their relationship?
I did not know Epstein's relationship with this woman. What I understood at the time was that Epstein wanted to pay for this woman's education. And from my perspective, at the time, this woman was attending a finishing and hospitality school. And it was something that HBRK had hired previously, a property manager to oversee his entities, and nothing with this transaction stood out to me or was alarming or implied sex trafficking.
Okay. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Kahn and hear my question.
I'll give you more time if I don't take it out. Ro Khanna, thank you for coming. Is it true that Jane Doe 4, the citation is Doe versus Jeffrey Epstein, 1:19 CV 07675, Southern District of New York, received a financial settlement directly from the estate, as her attorney has claimed?
I'm sorry, I don't know who Jane Doe 4 is.
She's the person who has been widely described as alleging that President Trump raped or abused her when she was 13 in the 1980s. And her attorney is out there, has said that she received a settlement from the estate.
Congressman, may I just tell him who Jane Doe 4 is, just so
Yes.
it refreshes him?
Okay, I believe I understand who you're referring to. If you don't mind, may you please repeat the question?
Is it true that she received a financial settlement directly from the estate? Her attorney said that she has. I just want
I
to,
believe that Jane Doe 4 received a settlement via mediation with the estate, I believe in 2025.
and her attorney saying she received that settlement because she was a victim of Epstein and President Trump. Is that accurate?
I don't recall the mediation statement or the lawsuit in particular, but I don't have recollection of President Trump. I know that she alleges that Epstein abused her, but I don't recall President Trump.
And I guess it would only be the mediation statement that would be,
I believe she filed a lawsuit, so there was a complaint, which I believe is public. So if I'm not speaking correctly, we can look at the complaint and see if she makes that allegation. But I don't recall from the mediation statement that, I don't even actually, now I'm thinking about it, I don't even know if she made a mediation statement. So I don't have any recollection of her making allegations against President Trump.
and do we know why she was ineligible to receive the compensation from the Epstein Victims Compensation Program?
The Epstein Victims Compensation Program, in my view, was a great success. And I'm very happy that that was the first thing I did as co-executor to set up that program. There were 136 claimants that were paid over $121 million. But there were also many individuals that were deemed ineligible for compensation. I believe what you're implying is she was deemed ineligible for compensation. With the Epstein Victims Compensation Program, as co-executors, we wanted to have no involvement. We said that the program could pay out unlimited funds from the estate. There was no limit to any award. Jordy Feldman, who ran the Victims Compensation Program, did not share with us the individuals' packets that they submitted with their allegations against Epstein and or the estate. So I don't know, I never saw the packet. The only information we received as co-executors were the individuals' names and the award that they received, or a list of the individuals that were deemed ineligible.
Is it the last point then, so I just to get on the record, Jane Doe Ford did get a settlement. You don't know anything beyond it, but she was given a settlement. Is it there's some people who've said, oh, this is all a hoax. The survivors obviously say there are over 1,000 survivors. Given your situation, would you say it's fair to say that there are hundreds of women who were abused or raped or trafficked? And would you say that there are more than Epstein and Maxwell that were involved?
I don't agree with the statement that there were 1,000+ survivors. My understanding is that the Epstein Victims Compensation Program gave out awards to 136 women. The estate then settled mediation or individually with another 59 individuals, which I believe is 195. I believe, and there's allegations that maybe there's another 50 women out there in my belief. So I'd say the number is probably somewhere in the 250 range, not 1,000.
And what about, would you say it's fair to say that there were other men involved either in trafficking, raping, abusing, or participating in the abuse of these girls other than Maxwell and Epstein?
I can't speak for what other men did. I could only speak as co-executor, what I see in the lawsuits against the estate that I'm now tasked with reading and trying to understand. But I can say to you that in some of the settlements that were made, as well as the Epstein Victims Compensation Program, women were allowed to have carve-outs from their release. And there were a number of carve-outs from both the Epstein Victims Compensation Program and the mediation.
What does that mean?
What the carve-out means, when we set up the Epstein Victims Compensation Program, we set up a very broad release. And the thought process as fiduciaries and co-executors was that we did not want to settle with a woman for her to then turn around and sue another employee or someone who was a contractor or affiliated with the estate. So at the time when we were negotiating the release, David Boies was involved in that conversation, and we at first he was against a broad release, and when the estate and Jordy Feldman and Ken Feinberg all decided that the estate was going to give out larger rewards because the release was a little broader, he agreed to the release. But what I'm saying is that the carve-out would be if this plaintiff's attorney or if this victim was unsure of whether or not this person was covered by the release. They wanted that name to specifically say, this release does not cover this individual.
So there were other men involved based on that.
I'm not making allegations.
Possible.
Women wanted to have other names carved out. I'm not making any statements that other men were involved. I'm not aware of what
Thank you.
went on. Thank you.
And we'll end the minority round here. We'll go off the record.
We'll go back on the record. Mr. Kahn, and it's 1:02 p.m. Mr. Kahn, towards the end of the last hour, there were discussions about the estate settlement fund for victims and survivors of the crimes of Mr. Epstein, and it was mentioned that there were carve-outs for other individuals. Could you please inform us of who those individuals are that were carved out?
Yes. My recollection is that from the Epstein Victims Compensation Program, I'm aware of 2 carve-outs. There may have been a few more, but these are the 2 that I'm aware of. One was Alan Dershowitz, and the other carve-out was Prince Andrew. Regarding the mediation, there were 2 additional carve-outs. One was Leon Black, and the other was Jess Staley.
And just for clarity, could you briefly explain what it means that these individuals were carved out?
Yes. So when I was alluding to the release from the estate's perspective, as fiduciaries, us wanting as broad a release as possible, because we did not want an individual that worked for Epstein or someone that may have been indemnified to later come back to us for legal fees. We wanted as much coverage as possible so that we could have finality. The victims that chose to carve out these individuals, I don't believe were meant to be covered, but maybe they were. I think that the individuals wanted there just to be 100% clarity that these individual names that were carved out were not part of the release.
Understood. Switching gears a little bit now, at HBRK, Harry Beller was a part of that entity, is that correct?
Yes.
And Mr. Beller, I believe you testified earlier, his role was that he handled a lot of the derivatives and investment accounts for Mr. Epstein, is that correct?
Yes.
And when did Mr. Beller leave HBRK?
I believe Mr. Harry Beller left employment in May of 2014.
And do you know why Mr. Beller left in May of 2014?
As I testified earlier, I believe to the minority, Mr. Beller was predominantly involved in working on investments for Les Wexner, and in addition to Epstein. But at the time, from 2000, I don't recall the exact date when Mr. Wexner and Epstein terminated their relationship, but let's just say approximately 2008, the amount of transactions and volume that Mr. Beller was working on had slowed down. So at that point in time, Epstein was just working predominantly on, at that point in time, Mr. Beller was working just on Epstein stuff, and there was not a lot of work. And Epstein did not think that he was getting good value for paying Mr. Beller's compensation package, and decided that he was going to no longer pay for his services.
And you mentioned that the business relationship between Mr. Wexner and Mr. Epstein ended in the 2000s. You didn't say that you didn't know exactly when that was. Do you know why that relationship ended?
I do not know why it ended.
And whose decision was it for Mr. Beller to no longer be employed with HBRK?
It was Epstein's decision.
And was that decision to terminate Mr. Beller, is that decision made with you?
I was not part of the decision. I would have liked Harry Beller to stay employed and continue to work together. It was Epstein's sole decision.
And at that point, how did your role change after the departure of Mr. Beller?
Well, as I testified earlier, Mr. Beller was working on clients' investments and stocks and options derivatives and doing the accounting for it, as well as tracking Epstein's assets and investments. The accounting work that continued thereafter was not work that I took on. Another accountant for Epstein did that work. What I picked up from Mr. Harry Beller's work was I was involved with tracking Epstein's stocks and bonds and reporting to him on a monthly basis the value of those assets.
And who was the other accountant that picked up the lion's share of the other work?
A woman by the name of Jeannie Brennan, who worked out of the St. Thomas office.
Are you aware of how long Miss Brennan worked for Mr. Epstein?
I don't recall how long she worked. I know that in 2005, when I began working for New York Strategy Group, she was already working for Epstein.
And was there any type of agreement when Mr. Beller left HBRK that governed his departure from the entity?
I believe he received a severance payment. Maybe he was on salary for a period of time. I don't recall the amount or the details of that severance.
Was the entity, did you take sole ownership or management of the entity at that point?
At that point in time, I believe the year was 2014, when we filed our tax return for the 2014 tax year. I was the 100% owner of HBRK.
How did HBRK's business change with the departure of Mr. Beller?
I don't think it changed much because majority of the work that Beller was focused on had already diminished over the years, with Mr. Wexner no longer being a client of Epstein's. So, as I said before, I picked up a portion of it, and Jeannie Brennan picked up a portion, but HBRK still continued to do accounting and bookkeeping services on behalf of Epstein and a number of his other entities.
And how well would you say that you know Mr. Beller?
At the time that we worked together, we had, both a personal and work relationship.
By personal relationship, what does that mean?
That we might see each other outside of work.
Social events, thing of that nature?
I only recall one or two circumstances, but we were friendly, and we are both Jewish, so during certain Jewish holidays, we wish each other a Happy New Year, or, speak along those lines. So I only remember one or two events outside of work, but we had a friendly relationship, more than just coworkers.
Do you still have a relationship with Mr. Beller?
Unfortunately not.
You say unfortunately not. Why do you still not have a relationship with Mr. Beller?
Because when I took on the role of co-executor, and there were many lawsuits that occurred, and I believe that Harry Beller was subpoenaed, and part of it, it just made it a little challenging for us to continue to communicate.
Reporting indicates that Mr. Beller made some large cash transactions over a series of months towards the end of his employment with Mr. Epstein. Are you aware of Mr. Beller's large cash transactions?
I'm aware that Mr. Beller had signatory authority for Epstein's accounts at JP Morgan and then Deutsche Bank. And I'm aware that Mr. Beller withdrew cash at times. I'm not familiar with any particular transactions.
Reporting indicates, based off legal documents in the 2022 U.S. Virgin Islands lawsuit against JP Morgan, that under the span of 18 months, there were checks cashed for approximately $800,000. Are you familiar with that figure, or that occurring?
I'm not familiar with the figure, but could you repeat the time frame that it was reported, $800,000, please?
It was around the time of Mr. Beller's departure from HBRK, so I believe that would be 2014. These figures were found out as part of the 2022 U.S. Virgin Island lawsuit against JP Morgan, and the SARs that were unsealed as part of that case showed that in under 18 months, Mr. Beller had cash checks for approximately $800,000.
I'm not aware of any particular amounts, but I could testify that that amount seems abnormal to me. I don't recall ever having $800,000 of cash over an 18-month period.
Between the years of 2013 and 2014, so towards the end of Mr. Beller's working arrangement at HBRK, he sent checks in the value of tens of thousands of dollars signed by himself to members of his family. Are you aware of who is?
I don't know who it is.
Are you aware of who is?
It might be one of his children. I'm not sure.
Are you aware of who is?
I believe that's Harry Beller's son.
Are you aware of who is?
I'm not aware.
Are you aware of who is?
I'm not aware.
Are you aware of who is?
I'm not aware.
Are you aware of any of the transactions made by Mr. Harry Beller to his family members between the years of 2013 and 2014?
I believe these transactions were made. I'm not familiar with the specifics. The only way I would have seen these transactions would have been on the gift tax reporting. But sitting here today, I don't recall what we reported in 2000. You said 2013?
2013 to 2014.
I don't recall the specifics of those gift tax reports, but if I would have seen those checks, they would have been coded to gifts, and we would have recorded them if they were over the annual gift tax amount.
Would you have approved these checks?
No, I was not in position to approve any checks.
Do you have any understanding of why Mr. Beller may have sent checks to individuals within his family from Epstein-related entity accounts?
I don't have any understanding of why Mr. Beller would have sent those checks. However, I can say that in all my dealings with Harry Beller, he was an honest and straightforward person. So my presumption would be that he had Epstein's approval to send those checks and that did not do it in a fraudulent or improper fashion.
As the personal accountant to Mr. Epstein, were you aware of the frequent cash withdrawals made by Epstein-related entities?
I am aware that when Harry Beller was a signatory, he withdrew cash. I don't recall the frequency. And when Harry Beller was no longer working, that Darren Endyke withdrew cash.
And sorry, just to be clear, you said Darren Endyke would withdraw cash?
When Harry Beller was no longer working for Epstein, Darren Endyke, I believe other than Epstein, was the only signatory on his accounts. So Darren Endyke would withdraw cash from Epstein's accounts.
And were these cash withdrawals, were they reflected in your accounting records?
Yes, every withdrawal would be recorded in Epstein's books and records.
And how would those be categorized?
When the money would come out of cash, it would go from cash to petty cash. That would be the journal entry for the books and records.
Who would instruct, whether it be yourself or another member of HBRK, who would instruct someone to facilitate providing cash to another individual?
From the accountant's perspective, we track the cash. So when the cash came, it was put in a safe, and we were recorded on Epstein's books and records. As far as dispersing cash, it would, the approvals would come from Epstein. For example, if a property manager wanted or needed $2,000 or $3,000 cash to pay tips, to buy groceries, to pay for dry cleaning, they would come to the office and they would sign out a slip that said 2,000 petty cash. We would then set up a sub-account for that individual. Let's just say in this example, it was Richard Barnett, 2,000 petty cash. He now is accountable for that $2,000 petty cash. And if he ever wanted to receive another dollar of petty cash, he needed to bring back receipts for how he spent that money. Now, he might come back to us after, spending $1,600 with a $400 balance and say, can I have another 1,000 or 2,000 in petty cash? And provided that he had receipts, he would then receive more petty cash.
And at any given time, how much cash was kept in the safe at HBRK?
I did not handle the petty cash, so I don't recall the amounts, but I'd say somewhere in the range of $20,000 or $30,000.
Would you also provide cash for Mr. Epstein to keep in his New York townhome?
Epstein would request cash, and for a period of time, when I met with Epstein, I believe I testified earlier that we used to have meetings at Epstein's townhouse, and it was usually a group of us that would attend, and then as individuals were no longer working for Epstein, for example, Emad Hanna or Harry Beller, the group got smaller. So for a period of time, I was asked when we would come from HBRK office to bring Epstein cash, and he was given the cash, but I don't know if Epstein, used the money and spent it. I would see him every 3 weeks. So I don't know if that was spending money for 3 weeks or if he put it in his safe. I don't know what he did with the cash.
Is there a certain increment of cash that you would often supply Mr. Epstein with when you would meet with him at these 3-week intervals?
The amounts that I recall from the last few years of working for Epstein was typically $6,000 that I would bring him approximately every 3 weeks.
Is there a reason or rationale for the $6,000 figure?
That was what was either requested and communicated to me from Epstein directly or from Leslie Groff.
Would you personally provide that cash over to Mr. Epstein?
If I were visiting him, I would bring it. If Epstein were in town and I were not seeing him because I didn't have a need to see him or I was on vacation, maybe his driver Jojo or his house manager would pick it up, or one of his assistants. but I saw Epstein on, a fairly regular basis, so the cash would be withdrawn from the safe from Bella Klein. She would then give it to me, and when I met with Epstein, I would give it to him.
Did you ever provide any cash to any woman or girl during your time working for Mr. Epstein?
I was not involved in petty cash, and I could probably count on the number of times on one hand that I would open the safe. I didn't want to be involved with, I didn't know the combination by heart, so I had it written down, and I didn't want to be bothered with opening the safe. But, probably in my 14 or 15 years, one or two handfuls of times, I needed to go into the safe for one reason or another. I don't recall if I was giving the cash to property managers or to women or to pilots or to Epstein, but I can tell you that I did go in the safe about 5 or 10 times over my 14 years.
Did you ever witness Miss Klein providing cash to young women or girls?
Many individuals would come, as I said, property managers, pilots, assistants. On occasion, I did see Miss Klein provide cash to these individuals I just mentioned, but I never saw Miss Klein give cash to a minor.
Did any of the women or girls Miss Klein provided cash to surprise you at all?
Most of the women that came for cash were typically Epstein's assistants, so I was somewhat familiar with them from, sending them payroll records to fill out, W-4, and their documentation for health insurance if their entity provided. So I knew most of the assistants that came into the room that requested petty cash.
And which assistants? Can you provide their names for us, please?
I could provide names of assistants, but I can't, from my recollection, recall a particular instance where I saw a woman come in. I have no specific memory of an instance where someone came in, but I can recite assistants' names, but I can't tie that to them coming and withdrawing petty cash. I also would like to say that there was, when I was talking about when we worked together, Bella Klein and I, the first 4.5 years we were in a large office together. The four of us had individual desks, and I was at one end and she was at the other. So I might not always see if someone came in. For the 2 years that we were together at 301 East 66th Street, we did share an office. So it was likely I could see people coming in there. But thereafter, from I believe May 2012 until Epstein's incarceration, we did not share an office.
Do you know why Mr. Epstein needed access to so much petty cash?
Well, Epstein used petty cash for many reasons. First, as I alluded to earlier, the property managers requested petty cash for expenses relating to the home. But the petty cash needs that I recall were magnified after J.P. Morgan dropped Epstein as a client, because J.P. Morgan supplied credit cards, I believe Master and Visa cards for Epstein. And the only other card that Epstein had at the time was American Express. And for a lot of vendors back in 2013 and 14, they didn't always accept American Express. So it was difficult for us to obtain new credit cards. So cash was used more than when we had credit cards, from my understanding. But the property managers used it for expenses relating to the house, whether it was groceries. At one point in time, I know we had a chef that withdrew a lot of cash to buy food that was prepared. The assistants used it for shopping errands, as well as for buying stuff on behalf of Epstein. Our office used petty cash for if someone was going out and buying office supplies or meals, and the pilots used it predominantly for travel and for tipping.
And you mentioned that it was difficult for Mr. Epstein to obtain new credit cards. Why was that?
It was after JP Morgan dropped him. I believe he had a difficult time obtaining credit cards due to his prior conviction or pleading, I'm sorry, of soliciting a minor for prostitution.
Are you aware that there was a pattern of withdrawals of cash for exactly $9,800?
I was not aware of the amounts or the cadence of withdrawals. I was not involved in the process.
You didn't review any type of statements that would show withdrawals and withdrawal amounts?
The QuickBooks file had every transaction recorded, so it was in the QuickBooks file, but it was just not an area that I worked on. With Epstein's personal QuickBooks file, the 2 or 3 things that I was focused on was picking up any income or deductions that would relate to his personal tax return, and picking up his gifts that would need to be reported on separate gift tax returns.